action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chin-wag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Andrey Ivanov, a strategy and risk boffin hell-bent on getting business folk to make better decisions. Andrey is a fellow pod host and student of Professor Ritson. He's also one of Call to Action's time-travelling guests, joining us now from tomorrow morning in New Zealand. He puts his PhD in economics to the test by hosting Business Games, an educational podcast and newsletter series applying game theory to help leaders deal with uncertainty. Andrey says the concept of games is an incredibly powerful tool for strategy, and anyone in governance, risk and strategy must familiarise oneself with how to use it. Welcome to the show, Andrey.
Thank you very much for having me, Giles. What an introduction. Thank you.
Good stuff. Right, 7 quick-fire questions. Number 1, Mac or PC?
PC.
Ooh, book or Facebook?
Book.
LeBron James or Magic Johnson?
There's no Michael Jordan. God damn it. Magic. Magic. I'm old school.
Number 4, experiment or play?
Play.
Game theory or complexity theory?
Game theory for me, which is interestingly enough connected to complexity theory if you look at the Wikipedia.
I don't know what these are, I can guess, but Steinlager or Wakachangi?
Wakachangi. Steinlager is big and kind of, whatever, corporate. Wakachangi is craft, so always craft.
Okay, right, a New Zealand one for you now. Togs or undies?
Oh, God. Togs.
Have you seen that? I saw recently, or today for the first time ever, it's an ad from New Zealand from Trumpet Ice Cream called Simplifying Summer.
No, I haven't. It sounds like a Kiwi ad. It's an iconic brand.
Yeah, it's all about at what distance from the sea do togs become undies, and it's brilliant.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, no, we'll add the link to that on this episode, I think, because everyone needs to see it. Andrey, thank you so much for joining us. We start every episode of Call to Action by asking guests to talk about how their career began and the often not so linear paths they take to get to where they are now. So you have a highly impressive PhD in economics, but what was your first ever job? And then what was your first proper job?
I was thinking about the distinction, but while listening to other episodes of Call to Action, I have this philosophical question to you, like, what's proper in a way? So my first job was taking orders and being a kitchen hand at a local pizza delivery place when I was at high school. You show up, you do stuff, you get paid. So yeah, sounds like a proper job to me. It's not necessarily a career that I set out to do, but at that time it was a job. And then I've done lots of other stuff, like being a research assistant, a teaching assistant, going through the PhD. You kind of have to teach, so that's how you finance your PhD. And if we're talking about the stuff afterwards, then my first proper job was working for a McKinsey spin-off called Elsner Mannweiler Credit Consult. It was a German company, so I guess that's the thing. I think I know where you're going with, but a question to you: how do you distinguish that? How do your guests usually distinguish?
It's a good question. I would say a proper job is one that holds your attention and stops you thinking about what's next. However, Andrey, I've seen your CV and I've seen how much you've moved around, so I'm not sure you're yet to find it.
No, exactly right. Because in a way, and we keep constantly reading about, and we compare to our parents, right, who probably stayed in one place for longer, and we all move around because there's just kind of the nature of work. So that's what attracted me to consulting, because I could. So I still kind of grew up in that era where if I read career advice, then being a job hopper was a negative thing. And so I thought effectively, like, how could I job hop without job hopping? It's like, let me set up my own consultancy. And then I'm a consultant and director of my own consultancy. But in fact, every 6 months, there is a different gig, right? Yeah. So that allowed me to actually combine the two things. Like, I was always thinking about what's next, like, what is the next project. I actually quite consciously never worked for the project I was working, but I was always working for the next one. So I always had half a mind to not only deliver on this project, but also think about how does this lead into something else, mostly in showcasing the capability in a way.
Yeah, so variety is something that appeals to you.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. And is that why you decided to leave academia then?
That's an interesting story. So it's actually the story of how I met my wife. So my professor, who is a fascinating character, he looks like Einstein. And he did his PhD in Berkeley in the 60s. He is kind of completely alternative, kind of like hippie-ish, but, a med professor. Anyway, he befriended this McKinsey director from Stuttgart office, and they together were doing a lot of stuff. They became really good friends. They were connected around a similar approach to work, and completely. So they would do joint projects together and consult companies. And this McKinsey guy, he came in, and so they jointly gave a series of seminars each year about the application of economics to the real world, so to speak. So our professor would bring the theory, and the McKinsey guy would bring real world problems. And I think there might have even been like some of the, I don't know, but there might have been some McKinsey clients who allowed their staff to be used in this context. We would break up into teams and we would solve problems. And for me, that was the first time where I went, economics is not just for government and setting policy. There's actually application to business. Like, that's exciting. And my wife and I, at that time, we didn't know each other, but we ended up doing a project on the pricing in the chocolate market. So we needed to do a lot of tasting in the of chocolates.
Tough gig.
Yeah, it's a terrible gig. Like, we were forced to sit at a cafe for several hours, drinking tea and tasting different chocolate. It was horror. We wrote a paper and started dating afterwards. So that was, interestingly enough, like, if you want to know more, we found one brand which we thought was underpriced in the market. Like, it had the quality of the top, like Valrhona and Michel Cluzel. So these are considered basically the Rolls Royce of the premium chocolates. And this brand, Bernard Castellan, at that time it was a 10-year entrant, but compared to like hundreds of years maybe for others, they were relatively new. And we thought they were underpriced. Within several months after we completed the project, they increased their prices significantly. Now, I'm not saying that the McKinsey guy actually gave them a call.
I'm saying that.
But I'm also not saying that, right? I mean, I have no idea, but it's just, we thought, they're underpriced and they've been around for a decade, and then they increased the prices. This is interesting. I'm going to claim that as a win.
Yeah. And so anyone who's unfamiliar with what type of problems you would be solving in those instances, and that includes me, can you give me any other examples of types of business problems that you would work on with McKinsey and your professor?
Other people got like a much more serious projects allocated, like the pricing for Deutsche Bahn, the railway. And you needed to figure out who are the competitors, like what market is it in, right? And who are the competitors, and how are those priced? And like, you would think about the journey that people are taking. Now, Germany, I think it's a bit like England. Germany is crisscrossed with railways, and you would quite often, it's not really concentrated in terms of living, but you would have areas which, like Ruhrgebiet, which Düsseldorf and Köln, I think, are sort of in there. So it's an area of where 20 million people live, but they live in all sorts of villages, but the villages go kind of from one to the other and from one to the other. And so the train network is amazing. So if you think about, like, my wife, she worked in Frankfurt while we were living in Mannheim, and every day she would go to Frankfurt and having a train, just high-speed train, covering like 150 kilometers. It's absolutely not a problem. Anyway, I don't know why I talk about this. So, but pricing in that, so that would be actually pricing in any market. That would be an obvious one. The opening of stores, and by the way, I'm just speaking like purely about the game theory applications and type of problems where which we would approach. So, launch of a new product. Customer retention, I guess you have to think a little bit about the interaction. Maybe it's not exactly game theoretic, but it could be. Remuneration inside the company. Anyway, go on.
I'm just mindful of people thinking that you just sat around eating chocolate, but which
wouldn't that be a gig?
And then, so let's talk about making better decisions then, and you can obviously lead this into game theory, etc., if you would like to. But what is it you love most about helping people make better decisions? So much so that you've dedicated, your life to it.
So obviously I studied economics, and I was always more fascinated about reconstructing the human behavior, right, from the ground up. In partly is because I'm driven to understand what's going on. So this is one of my I'm really curious about why things happen. So for me, economics is not about macro trends and interest rates and that sort of stuff, like growth. I don't do macro that well. So when it comes to like what's economics about? Well, it's a study of people making decisions about things like work and leisure, consumption and savings, money. Ultimately, it's because we don't live alone. It's a study of people interacting with each other in some form of market. And by the way, if you think like chocolates was cool, I think Gary Becker wrote, I believe he won a Nobel Prize. Anyway, he was one of the Chicago School economists. He wrote papers about the dating market. So this is, a particular market for marriage. And so like there are people applying economic theory to all sorts of things. What are the elements of decision making? Because I wanted to know, like, okay, how do people make decisions about those concepts? So you've got obviously a decision-making apparatus, and we now understand that it isn't your brain, or at least it's it's not your conscious brain most of the time. It's your emotions, it's the context in which you're making them, your environment, which in turn contains the rules of what kind of decisions you can make, so what's available to you. And because we're guided about, like, not everything goes, obviously in business, like there are regulations that you can't break, so there are particular rules around which guide our actions and our decisions, and also who you're interacting with. And finally, it's the bit where the uncertainty comes in. It's all the knowledge that you have about the rules, about what others can do, about what others are doing, and also the knowledge about others' knowledge, right? And so everything that I just said is a bit theoretic and a bit esoteric, okay? So, but in terms of what attracted me personally to this, that's it. It's trying to understand how things work. Now, if I were to make a case for why others should be interested, it's kind of this. So decision making leads to actions, and actions lead to results, right? So you have this thing. It says there's a decision, action, result. And working backwards, if you want better results, you want to know what kind of actions you need to take and what kind of actions others would be taking, because we're talking about interactive decisions. And therefore, then you need to think about, what kind of decisions we need to take in order to lead to actions, in order to lead to better results. So I hope that's less theoretical and a bit more to the point.
Yeah, no, it all makes sense. And actually, I was listening to a couple of your episodes this week, and what is interesting to me with my, agency hat on is how much overlap there is to what we do from a marketing strategy sense. But in the same token, what you talk about, and I think what you focus on, is what I recall Mark Ritson referring to as, I think the way he talked about it is that strategy is kind of that game of chess, but the business strategy and everything else that it entails in terms of mitigating risk is almost like the game that's going on under the table, and understanding the different contexts of different departments, etc., to navigate risk is, an entirely different challenge in many ways.
Absolutely. So chess is the analogy for strategy. I think we both agree because we hang around the same group of people on Twitter. So it's been that concept around, what was that famous chess thingy on Netflix that came out? Was it last year? Queen's Gambit.
That's it. Yeah.
Right. So some people were writing that, you should study chess too. There are some elements, but what makes chess totally boring is that it's visible, right? Literally everything there is to know, and you know what the other person knows, and it's unambiguous because you see what they're seeing.
The knight can't suddenly move diagonally.
Exactly, and it doesn't, a different, a rook doesn't all of a sudden just materialize on on a particular square where there wasn't one. Game theory goes back to John von Neumann, and I don't know if you or the audience know about who John von Neumann was.
Assume I know nothing.
Okay, Dr. Strangelove, or why, or how I learned to love the atom bomb, with Peter Sellers.
Yes.
Okay, so John von Neumann was the inspiration for the Peter Sellers character. John von Neumann is one of the last brilliant polymaths. So he had, I think he was one of the progenitors of the ergodic theory. He did a lot of stuff in mathematics, like a lot of stuff in both theoretical and applied mathematics. He contributed seminal papers to theoretical and applied physics. He worked on the hydrogen bomb. He was the consultant to the United States government on national security. And while working on the hydrogen bomb, he just kind of developed game theory as a hobby. And the reason why he didn't like games, he didn't like chess because he thought it's computationally computable, like you could solve it. And that was not interesting to him because there was no uncertainty. He didn't like games of chance because it's just pure chance, it's just pure luck. So he didn't like that either. And he loved poker because he said that poker has the information that only one person knows and the information that both know. And the rest is the probabilistic computations. So, and he thought that if he could solve poker, he would be able to solve the problem of the nuclear holocaust. He never solved poker. It's still unsolvable, but he did develop game theory because of that. Now, this story, this little anecdote, I mean, obviously it's about John von Neumann. The way that I described it comes from the Knowledge Project episode 89 with Maria Konnikova, who was like any Duke. She was she's got a PhD in psychology, and she became a professional poker player and won things. But what got her into poker is somebody nudged her into the John von Neumann example, and she was like, "Oh, John von Neumann was smart, and he likes poker, so maybe there is something towards poker." So I think I kind of agree. It's poker is a better analogy for life because of that. There is skill, but there is also luck, and there is a counterbalance of the two.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good example, certainly when you compare it to chess. I now wish we'd asked you poker or chess in the quickfires. So what are the common problems that you see in business when it comes to making better decisions around uncertainty? You've decided to launch Business Games, which is a series we referenced in your intro. So maybe you can explain to our audience who may not have heard of it what that is.
I had this joke. I didn't workshop the joke, but there's the usual founder BS story. Like, I was observing a sunset once, and this farmer passed, and he sighed deeply, and I asked, "What's wrong?" And he sighed again and replied, "Oh, young man, I'm just so overwhelmed with uncertainty. How can I make better decisions?" And that was where I came. It's that's obviously rubbish, but. There are a couple of things. While we were consulting, I mean, first of all, I wanted to be a professor, right? So actually, taught at the graduate level. So that was always in me, and then I switched to the consulting. But I was always trying to coach. One client executive asked me once to coach him while he was doing his executive MBA in some things, in particular in statistics. And by the time I figured out what and how they were teaching, I was able to help him because I thought I can do this better. And that was the stats module, and the data module is a choice. It's like an appendage, and nobody really connects it to anything. And it's taught by stats professors who don't really see real world, and it's too easy. Anyway, at least it was then. So I thought, okay, I can do it better. And we also designed a course for the client, for the client's team, mid-management pricing team, to teach them the basics of game theory. And so that was the genesis. Then COVID basically allowed me time to do this, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do it now, because if not now, I might not get to it. So things that I wanted to get out of it, right, at the very minimum, is I'm trying to learn new skills and improve myself. Okay, so that's already a win. What was it? So who was it for? Sort of guided by my background, I thought executive education. And I looked around, obviously, follow a lot of written stuff because I'm a student. I believe just by luck, I went into his last ever in-person Melbourne Business School course. So I've done that for a week on the brand management. I think he switched to mini MBA straight after that. Anyway, so he was talking on podcasts as enough of the kind of chat show format, which is true. I mean, if I were starting before, that would be the format, but now I can't compete with the more established ones. So I kind of guided what is out there and what can I do differently. And so I had this learning idea, and I thought, how can I deliver that? Because I'm also fascinated about podcasts as a form. And I thought, okay, what if I deliver effectively an audio course in a podcast format? And we talk about making better decisions. Business games obviously refers to game theory, so I thought, and its application is for business, and I thought it's a cool name. Doesn't exist. I started consuming a lot of courses of my own, for my own professional development. So Ritson is part of it, the Institute of Directors, and so on. So there were a lot of things that is out there, but I found the way that, maybe it's just me, but I couldn't find a good strategy course. And because I want to go to the first principles, so to speak, I am thinking, okay, can I do strategy? Well, let's do strategic thinking, because if you develop your thinking, you can then build strategy. So, and I couldn't find a good strategic thinking course either. And I thought, okay, let's try to. So that became the focus, and let's try to build something.
Your second season focused on business experiments. What is business experimentation? Can you explain what that actually means to our listeners?
Yeah, that's a good question. That was one of the key questions that we started with, because I was looking. First of all, I was thinking, okay, what should I do? And I came across a bunch of articles, and it looked like there was an increased number of articles about business experimentation, but they were all tech focused. It's like, whatever, Google runs 10,000 experiments a year, and why would senior managers debate about the color of the background? And it's like, you're right, why would they? I don't know. It's just, why is this a thing? That's an obvious point. But is it tech? Did business people never experiment, and all of a sudden they're experimenting because there are all these platforms? That doesn't make sense. Surely anybody who ever started a company is basically an experiment, right? And this is how you iterate and find out what resonates. So actually, that was one of the things. And I thought, okay, business games is experimental in and of itself. I don't know whether it survives. Let's run something that's self-contained and addresses this one thing. And it seems like it's a hot topic. Okay, so what's an experimental approach? The more I started, getting into that, I've done a lot of my own research. I will the lit review episode is not up, but it's coming up. So basically, what's an experimental approach? It requires, first and foremost, it requires a hypothesis. So it requires a testable, falsifiable hypothesis. So what does it mean? First of all, testability has two things. One is falsifiability, and the other is practical feasibility. That is to say that you need to be able to find counterexamples to the hypothesis that are logically possible. Because if it's like gravity right now, that's not a hypothesis. We have a gravity, you can measure it, right? It's not really like, you can't find on the surface of the earth a counterexample to gravity. It doesn't make sense. And the idea behind that is, if you are not learning, that's not an experiment, right? It's not. If you cannot learn, so if you cannot fail, you cannot learn, because then it's a belief. And if you cannot learn, that's not an experiment. So you're not experimenting, you're implementing. But before you can implement, like, what are you implementing? Do you put all the proverbial eggs in one basket? Well, you probably shouldn't. And on most decisions, you can actually find out what is true and what is not true. And then practical feasibility is, obviously, you need to be able to repeat that again. I mean, in the scientific sense, like, other people should be able to run your experiment. Because if you ran an experiment and can never be replicated, that's not really an experiment. So these are the key elements of experimentation. Now, for business, you got a couple of other things that are relevant. You need to have structured approach to learning. Experimentation is, or should never be, one-off. In fact, it's less risky to run many experiments than it is to run one, because by definition, if you can't if you can't disprove it, you're not learning anything. So if you run one experiment and one hypothesis, right, you test it and it proves to be false, well, okay, that's great, that's learning. You need another hypothesis. You need to go and iterate, right? Or you need to run several experiments at the same time. If you're only running one, you don't, suppose you disprove because you can never prove a hypothesis either. That's the thing. We can never, in statistics, like, it's not possible to prove anything. It's only possible to fail to disprove something. So that's key. So you need a structured process of incorporating learning into your further testing. You should actually be able to act on the evidence. So that's the other bit about the business experimentation, where, like, don't do it if you're not going to act on it, right? If there are certain things that, and there could be certain things where, you could run something and you might be able to screw your most loyal customers, and it might be profitable, at least in the short run, but you decided that that's not fitting into your overall strategy. And so you make you make choices outside of the experimentations. Like, okay, cool, then don't test that, right? Because you're not going to be incorporating that particular learning into the thing. So basically, I found, so there are more, we get deeper into it, but these are the key points. So hypothesis first and foremost, and then iterative kind of continuous learning, and having a structured process around that. So that's business experimentation in a nutshell.
You mentioned about Google and how many experiments they typically run. It would be interesting to know your thoughts on how much of that is part of their historic strategy, and how much of it, as I think it's probably increased in part, is down to their surplus of resource. Because obviously, talking about taking any risks as a business, there is a understandable kind of risk mitigation that you'll come up against in order to approve any type of experimentation. But Google not only would have had numerous successes to demonstrate the value of doing what they do, however, I wonder how easy it would have been to even get started if they hadn't already got a monstrously profitable business.
That's a very good point. I don't, Ritson has this quote, and I actually use it for one of the episodes, is that your portable toilet business has nothing to learn from Steve Jobs. I think it's that's why I don't, I like using visible brands cases to discuss something, but let's face it, we can't learn from Google exactly for that reason. It's fucking Google, What I would say is that I would push back a little bit on, I mean, you need nothing comes for free, right? I mean, if it were free, like, everybody would be doing it. Experimentation can be costly in terms of just having resources, like, for example, basically I know how to code, and I would be able to code A/B testing and la di da di da. I don't have time for that. So I don't really experiment that much, just the website is a website, and that's it. And people will go and I will, test one version of the website for like maybe 6 months to get the longer term thing. And that's the extent of my ability, because, we are just me and my wife doing this. Google obviously can do more. And it's like, yeah, you need resources for that. Absolutely. But quite often not doing anything is carries its own risk, because you are not finding anything new. So Rory talks about bees, and he says, about 20% of the bees don't follow the waggle dance. They just shoot off at random. Because if you find one source of pollen and you send all your bees there, and you exhaust that source of pollen and you don't find anything else. So if you're not searching while you're exploiting, so he talks about the on our episode about the explore exploit trade-off. So if you're not searching, if you're not exploring, there are limits to what you can explore. At some stage you run out of it, and then you're not prepared. So I would claim that while you shouldn't just invest everything into experimentation, it's just not every, as we discussed, not every decision can be subject to experimentation. At the same time, you also can't ignore that exploratory work, because at some stage you get surprised. COVID comes along, like there is a disruption of some kind, and that's a very visible worldwide disruption. But there are other disruptions in more local, and could be just to your you have one client, and like we had a client for 8 years, right? It was amazing, because we didn't even look for work found us. It was a large corporate, and we worked in different business units. We would deliver something, and then that person would like what we do and would talk to his colleague in another business unit, and then we would be approached and do something for another business unit. Well, that's great. What happens when that relationship goes? Well, it goes. So and it's like you can't just sign another client like that in our case. So we're seeing it, and I knew about it, right? So again, that was a conscious decision because of the lack of resources. So I didn't really need to convince myself that, I need to go and sign another client. But I just never, because we were so busy kind of implementing the projects for this client, is that we didn't really. So we were aware of that possibility, and we just took that as a risk. Well, that's fine. That's a conscious decision, but be aware that it's. You are totally right. Okay, so I will push back on Google with one thing, is that I think they started off with this idea of giving people 20% slack. So you work for 4 days, and then the 5th day you do whatever you like. From the very beginning. Now, obviously, what does it mean from the very beginning? By that time, they already had some funding, right? But I would even say they started like that, consciously. In fact, over time, I believe they actually removed that 20%, but they started off like that, and there were things that came out of it. Of course, you could also claim, like, what did Google really invent outside of search? And maybe like there are people who go, maybe not much, but they were able to then acquire some other companies, whatever. Anyway, that's why Google is a terrible example. But yeah, back to your point, yes, it's difficult to prove to people the value of one particular experiment. That's why I say that it's actually more costly to run one, because ultimately, like by definition, if it's not able to fail, you're not learning anything. But it's the learning that's important. So effectively, which is a fundamental problem of many managers, especially in corporates, but maybe also running their own companies, don't understand the point of experimentation, because they want an ROI on that project. And it's like, it cannot exist by definition. One-off experimentation testing one hypothesis should fail. If it doesn't fail, you're not learning anything.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. That's a really good point as well. You used the word slack earlier when you were talking about that, that 20% or that 1 day for Google employees. But you're right. It's just that tolerance as much as anything, isn't it? To allow that play and allow that failure, because you can't, going back to your honeybees stories, I've always loved that story. And I love the fact that for years it apparently stumped evolutionary theorists who expected them to be completely, compliant.
Yeah.
But again, going back, like we mentioned, we were talking about Rory before the show, but Rory will always say you should test counterintuitive things.
Yes.
And so counterintuitive things are exactly the opposite of what a lot of business managers and owners would probably want, because they want to just, be able to scale things and guarantee that the same things will happen when they scale it. And as you know, that's just not possible.
And again, back to game theory, because they're playing a different game. They're not playing a game where we do stuff. This is where, like, I think economics, or the traditional economics, is wrong. Because, well, no, that's not true. There is an agency theory. No. It's actually no. So I completely take that back. So traditional economists, or at least game theorists, applied game theorists, have known this problem for a long time. The alignment of your own incentives as an employee, and like every manager is an employee, right? I mean, even the CEO is employed by the board and has to report to somebody because it could lose the job. Your incentives are to keep your job. Your incentives are not to improve the overall health of the company. If they happen to coincide, well, that's great. It's like the incentives of the politicians are to be re-elected next time. It's not to institute meaningful change for the benefit of the country. So they're playing completely different games. And that's why it's, there's stuff that makes sense from the point of view of a company. Even Rory's point about test things that don't make sense, that statement in and of itself makes a lot of sense. But nobody, why do people not do it? Because everybody's scared for their job. Can I do just one thing about why is uncertainty a thing? Like, what people get wrong about uncertainty?
Yeah, sure.
First of all, misunderstanding the types of uncertainty. And you could use that within the complexity theory about the complex versus complicated stuff. You could also there are two types of uncertainty I found, and called epistemic and aleatory. Epistemic comes from the Greek word for knowledge, and that basically reflects the sentiment of, if I only had more data, I would be able to compute stuff. So you can decrease that level with more knowledge, that uncertainty. Aleatory comes from the Latin for the roll of the dice, and that reflects the inherent randomness of phenomena. You cannot reduce that uncertainty. And so, we talked about managers just now. So this story should be familiar to a lot of people, because it's a kind of amalgam of many real life stories. So a senior manager wants to evaluate a project, right? And charges his or her underlings to come up with the ROI. And then, realizing that there is uncertainty but no current data, an analyst or a vendor would recommend investing in a big data solution, right? They would say, well, if we, data is the new oil and all of that, and if we only have more data and can analyze it, we'll decrease that uncertainty. Okay, typically, millions of dollars in the years of investment later, there's still uncertainty. Like, nobody was able to reduce it. And that's where people think that they're living in that epistemic uncertainty world, which, well, if only we had more data, we would be able to know more, when in fact they're living in a completely just in a random world where random stuff happens. And you cannot reduce that. So I think fundamentally one issue, the one really big issue, is that people misunderstand the type of uncertainty that they're dealing with. And then there are also a lot of, which is related. So why did they want more information to start with? Because people also, and especially managers, but just generally people as well, we overvalue the knowledge in a way. We really think in binary terms, like either I know or I don't know. And if I don't know, oh my God, I need to know. There's nothing in between. Most of the world lives in between. You cannot measure everything, but you've also met people who go, especially creatives. I found, because when I talk to them about, you can measure marketing effectiveness, they go, no, you can't. Because it's, lots of different things. Like, that's true. There are a lot of different things happening, and you will never be able to 100% know. But that's not the point. If you go from 30% knowledge to 60% knowledge of some arbitrary percentage, right? You've just doubled your amount of knowledge. You're still around the middle, but you've just doubled. So that to me is important. So we need to move away from these binary classifications of I know or I don't know. If I don't know, I cannot make a decision. And if I know, I must know with certainty. Neither of those extremes is helpful. Anyway, that's it about that.
Well, that reminds me of again going back to Mark Ritson. He talks about the importance of having a prayer of uncertainty, which is just kind of allowing yourself not to have perfect knowledge, because as you've just so well articulated, it's just not even possible, and some is better than none. In fact, we say that regularly with clients who might understandably balk at the cost of doing some, really thorough, proper research sometimes, whether it's market or customer research. But the same rules apply. Some knowledge is better than none.
Exactly. And you can never have all knowledge. So some is better than none, and the perfection is the enemy of good, right? So, at some stage, some is good enough. And it's those extremes. Just avoid extremes. I mean, that's probably one of the takeaways.
Well, another one of our mutual friends and someone that's been on both our shows, JP.
Yeah.
I once tweeted, only the Sith deal in absolutes.
Yes.
And the worry about absolutes. And then JP helpfully said, yes, but that in itself is an absolute.
Yeah.
I called him a prick and moved on.
I remember that tweet. He also went on to say that it means that whoever said that, which I believe was Obi-Wan, right, might himself be a Sith.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You can never know. So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger.
Yeah.
But we've got two. I'm going to do them the other way around, actually, because we've got one from Mark in Edinburgh. And I wanted to talk to you about this earlier, so I'm pleased he sent this in. Mark says, could you tell us a bit about your stand-up comedy experience?
Yeah. So I guess it was my wife who nudged me to this. Like, she found the course. And interestingly enough, so we've got one guy who runs this comedy club, and it's a dedicated comedy club in Auckland, and he is so generous towards the comedy scene that you can basically, there's a couple of tiny little very dodgy but very cool places that you could kind of almost get for free and just practice stand-up there. And apparently, because one of our teachers on the course is from New York, and he started in the New York scene, he says, in New York, if you do open mic, like, you have to pay. So there's actually, like, people, figured out that like, there's not so much demand that you have to, even if you want to test some material, like if you're starting out, you have to pay to be able to perform. And in Auckland, apparently, so the guy was telling us that we're so lucky because we don't have to, we can just show up. Anyway, so my wife found this course, and she said, you've been talking about, liking stand-up for a long time. I mean, we're watching all the Netflix shows and stuff. It's like, why don't you go and do it? And I was a bit apprehensive at first. I was like, because we discussed that, right? If you're doing something, even though, I gave lectures and I presented to the C-suite and to the board as part of my consulting career, it's just showing up in front of strangers, holding up a mic and trying to be funny. This is just very, it's very disconcerting. But what the hell?
That's perfectly cued.
For some inexplicable reason, I have an alarm on for the time that I never get up at anyway. So this is just bizarre. It might have been my late night shenanigans, just pressing buttons. Hey Siri, surprise me tomorrow, okay?
Yeah, some chaos theory there at play.
So anyway, I did this course. It was fantastic, amazing, completely eye-opening about what comedy is and what it isn't. It's just incredible.
Nice. And how many gigs did you do? Did you do a proper gig?
I did a proper gig, yes. So we had to, as part of the course, like, you pay money and then you have to perform to a paying audience. The payment doesn't go to you. It goes to basically, hiring the venue, because it's just like a paying gig. It's a small one. And not all the members of the paying audience were friends and family. They were just some random people coming in from the street and just like, oh, there's an event. So we needed to prepare a 5-minute stand-up set. And it was about 19 of us, and there were 2 shows back to back scheduled. And we had a professional MC, so he's himself a stand-up and an MC. You want some takeaways? I think there's some takeaways
Yeah,
for
yeah,
business.
go on.
Yeah? Okay, cool. So first thing, growth mindset and doing the work. Yeah. It's not about how funny you are. It's about showing up and sucking a little less each time. Like, you will suck. Everybody sucks. Professional stand-ups suck. If you hear people for the first time doing, working out material, that's a lot of sucking. So what goes into the making a Netflix special, which I think is most people's understanding of stand-up, that's a polished set, sometimes years in the making.
Yeah.
So the second part is the iteration and experimentation. Okay, so you craft a joke, you test it, you get feedback, people laugh or they don't, you rewrite it, you test it again, you get another feedback, and you keep iterating. It's experimental in nature. This is that's just how, it's like the process of it on the other side, if you think about it, is incredibly boring. Like you tell people, and like for me, I geeked out about it. It's like, this is awesome, I can do this. And that was actually the whole point of the course. But I think some people would go like, oh, there's no magic, because it's not just, some really talented, funny person just woke up and decided to do a Netflix special and everybody's laughing. It's like, that's not how it works. But I love it because that's life doesn't work that way either. And the other part, which I think is where I think stand-up comics, by and large, they're probably better marketers than marketers, in the sense that they are absolutely 100% customer-centric and customer-obsessed, right? You need to take yourself out of the equation completely. Like, you think the joke works, but the audience doesn't laugh, you get that feedback immediately, and you just have to get over yourself and just... like Larry David, of all people, right, wasn't a really good stand-up comic. He was the stand-up because all the stand-ups loved him. It was really, really funny. But he would bomb with the audience. And I believe, like, at one show, he told a joke, audience didn't laugh. And he basically said, "You suck." And he dropped the microphone and just walked away. That's, typically the stand-ups are a bit more thick-skinned than that. And there's a lot of, like, you really take yourself out of the equation. You just work on the stuff that makes your paying. And that's why the paying stuff at the end of the course was so important, because our teachers told us, you need to experience that. You cannot just, perform to your friends. Like, you need to know what it's like to be and this is where professionalism comes in. It's like, you need to know that there are people on the other side who paid money and they want a good time, and you need to give them a good time. So I think that's I also think that's honest in a way, that you get that feedback, and you're either, it either works or it doesn't, but then you do it better next time, do a little bit better next time. So anyway, I think these are the three takeaways: growth mindset, iteration, and take yourself out of the equation.
It's unlikely you'll know this unless you've listened to every call to action episode, because I think it's come up at least once before, but we used to, as an agency, always send our new hires on stand-up comedy courses.
Wow,
we haven't
cool.
done it since the pandemic, but just as a 1 or 2 day course, just because I couldn't agree more with your point that lots of comedians are going to be better marketers than marketers, because there's something in the art of that type of wit and communication that's required, alongside the need to put together a great entertaining presentation, which in itself is is easier said than done. It's just so beneficial, and I think more business people should give it a go. Not that it's not terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, but another thing, if you're not, it's back to our earlier point, if you're not learning, it's like, what are you doing? And if you're not terrified, then you're not learning, because then you know, right? I mean, it's like,
exactly.
knowledge is not terrifying. Discovering new stuff is, or the possibility of quote unquote failure, but actually in that failure there is success, because you know a little bit more. Oh, that's brilliant that you were doing that. That is so cool.
Yeah, no, it was great. Who's your favourite stand-up comedian before we move on?
Well, growing up, it was Seinfeld. Currently, I'm totally in love with Hannah Gadsby's Douglas set. So not the Nanette set. I find Nanette really heavy. I mean, it's good, but it's kind of heavy. But her Douglas, her follow-up set, is just it's so brilliant, beautifully crafted. It's like a true master at work. I'm just because I'm looking at everything now from the point of view of crafting jokes. So I'm not even like some jokes I find rude or but I appreciating how they got to that point. It's like, oh, they tried this here and they tried that. So I'm actually looking at it from now with that appreciation, as I think your employees would also appreciate. So Hannah Gadsby's Douglas set, like, and then I like some new guys gals. Taylor Tomlinson, Nate Bargatze they're from the US, Daniel Sloss, he's Scottish. And I like the three of them. They're completely different. I like them for completely different reasons, but those three would be popping up in my head.
Nice one. Question 2 is from Sam from Cardiff, who asks, what is the most valuable thing that you have learned from one of your guests so far?
I have several. So first of all, this whole point of start with the hypothesis. Melissa talks a lot about it on our episode, and basically her quote: a lot of people say they're learning from experimenting, but they're actually just doing random stuff. So because they either have no hypothesis or they have no process of learning. So it's just trying things out is valuable, but it's not experimenting. You could try something, it might not work. That's not experimenting. It needs to be a much more conscious effort about you set a hypothesis and you do that. So Melissa talking about it in the context of startups, boardrooms, but also just generally business. A couple of things. Yeah, beware of the extremes. That's the other part. And I'm going to summarize maybe a couple that are coming from this whole thing. And I might not be able to place all of them to particular people who are in technology. None of them talk about technology. Everybody talks about humans. It's all about humans all the time. So, but even more precisely, I think it's less about individual humans and more about groups of humans over time. So it's more anthropology and less psychology. It's more foundation and less empire. And the final thing is golden rule sucks, right? It's actually your worst enemy if you want to make good strategic decisions. Especially the positive form, which says treat others as you would like others to treat you. This is really terrible. It's not empathetic. You're not actually putting yourself in the shoes of the others. You're not thinking from their point of view. You're thinking from your point of view. So it's very selfish. Actually, much better way is you should not ask what would I do in their shoes. You should ask what would they do in their shoes. So you really need to put yourself into the frame of mind of your counterpart, be it your customer or your competitor or your teammate even, right? Or when you're negotiating, because it's another application of game theory is negotiations. Actually, anything with interaction, because game theory, we didn't touch upon game theory, what it is, but ultimately it's a study of interactive decision-making. So Kahneman and the original kind of psychology-driven behavioral economics is all about individual decision-making. How do individuals behave under uncertainty? But most of it is individual. Game theory is all about interactive decision making. So you've got some rules of the game. You've got your counterpart, whoever that is. As I say, it could be your teammate, it could be the negotiating party, it could be your customers, it could be your competitors, it could be a regulator for regulated industries. And they have their knowledge, and you have your knowledge, and you don't know what they know. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that. And they want to do stuff, but they want to do stuff from their point of view, with their culture, their emotions, their moral settings, their knowledge, their education. It's them who are making their decisions, and you're making your decisions, but you have to put yourself into not put yourself into their shoes, but you really have to get into their head in a way and ask the question of what are they doing? How are they feeling? And so that's another takeaway. And we do, incidentally, like Melissa's episode is really good, by the way. So we discussed that part. So yeah, golden rule is your worst enemy, and there's a better rule, which is really treat others like they need to be treated. Yeah, so put yourself into really immerse yourself and think from the other person's point of view.
Good stuff. Good answer. So the final part of the interview then, Andrey, is our 4 pertinent posers that we put to all of our guests, starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I always waited to know stuff before I could talk about it or promote myself. But it's a bit like having an awesome product with no marketing, right? And then wondering, like, why is nobody buying it? Because you haven't told anybody about it. And so my advice would be to definitely prioritize the product, but also allocate a lot of time to talk about it, because just being comfortable until you know something, like sometimes, like we discussed, it's like it's that fallacy of I don't know versus I know, and there's nothing in between. Like you should work in between, and so that relates immediately to that. So I guess the career advice would be, I mean, it's a generally good advice. It's a generic one, but let's say career advice, if I were to talk to myself, I would say go and like networking. Networking is a funny thing. Done properly, it bears fruit like 10 years from now. But it's difficult to know what done properly means. Like be curious and invest in talking about stuff. You also learn through that, because the more people you talk to, just develop a network, while definitely still keeping a focus on doing the work and kind of learning. So you can't be all talk and nothing. So you can't I know for a fact that a lot of people on your podcast, we like trashing Gary Vee, and I think he is, to me, like that's all talk and not really. I mean, some of it is right, just by pure magic, because just by pure randomness, he says a lot of stuff. Some of it makes sense, but it's just a lot of self promotion, and I don't like that.
There's a lot of stuff getting sprayed about. Awesome. If you could banish one thing from your industry, what would it be and why? So I guess that can, I mean, we're quite flexible there in terms of industry, but I would suggest it's, just general kind of business activities. Yeah.
Yeah. The obsession with wanting certainty, right? I mean, I'd say that, wouldn't I, right?
No, that's a good answer though. And I think the trouble is that's going to exist everywhere, like inside and outside of business, isn't it? I mean, human beings want certainty. We seek it.
Exactly, because because ultimately uncertainty, but like that's the thing about, we know that we evolved in a space which we don't live in, right? I mean, and it took us many thousands of years to actually get to that point, but we evolved in the savannah, where if something rustles, with the grass rustles, you run away. Like you don't really investigate, and you don't like, oh, I'm gonna take my chances. Like, no, those people don't survive, so you run away. And there's a lot of like running away stuff built into us. That's why we run from uncertainty. It's a bit like craving sugar, right? I mean, we evolved to crave sugar because there was not enough of it around. And so we never really built in the top boundary. It's like we know that we need some sugar and we want it. And now we have a lot of it and it's free and we're just eating. And, I put on a lot of weight during the during the lockdown. And that's, again, it takes effort to actually correct some of those built-in behaviors. But yeah, that's one thing.
Yeah. At the risk of opening a box that should never be opened on an interview, do you consider religion to be a way of humans trying to create a false certainty?
Yes, but also myths and and Marvel Cinematic Universe and right, and clubs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just part of us. I'm really religion is an interesting one. I'm probably agnostic. I don't think it should. Yeah, I used to believe very very kind of openly, and that it should not be organized in a way, like it shouldn't be run as a corporate, because the spirituality is an individual thing. It's not a. But there's also a lot of stuff to be said for belonging to a group. So I know somebody who moved from Italy to Singapore. And I don't think they're awfully religious, but they are Catholic. And so what they did is they found a Catholic church in Singapore, and that immediately helped them by. And I know that that's not the only example. I also know South Africans who moved to New Zealand. So there's a lot of like pattern of, if you go somewhere else, then if you find a group of like-minded individuals, and that's kind of more like signaling, not signaling. No, it's more like, well, I don't know, coordination problem. I guess it's
Yeah.
and it's just pragmatic, and it's actually really, really useful, and it's nice. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the very final part I'll say about that is discovering a little bit more, and just kind of thinking. If you think about meditation, which I think a lot of non-religious people would go like, yeah, that's nice, comes from the East, and it's nice to be meditating and thinking about stuff, and just you order your thoughts, you structure your thoughts, and again, that's sort of, you're working on your thinking apparatus, which is a good thing. Well, in the West, prayer is nothing other than a meditation. I mean, sort of, whether it's Buddhist monks meditating, or Catholic monks, or Franciscan monks, praying, that's a similar type of thing. And so there are certain practices that we've developed, or the culture's developed, that are kind of like good practices, if that makes sense. And they're good practices for decision making, especially. So it's a bit complex. It's kind of, I'm not like organized religious, but I do, like, I see some things in there that are actually helping with I think getting better at making decisions, like reflection. So as a practice,
I'm actually really pleased I did open that box, because two points on that is, one, I think you just spoke about religion better than I've heard most people ever speak about religion, so that's wonderful. And secondly, because I like the fact, and this is how I'm now going to describe myself, because I too would describe myself as agnostic, but you described yourself as probably agnostic, which is wonderful.
yeah. I think I'm spiritual, but I'm agnostic as to what it looks like, and again, there are. Oh, and by the way, this is another bit. Maybe I'll spoil this, but maybe I should just stop. But I'll say this one other bit anyway. I think and it drives a lot of, like, dogma is not good, right? But I don't look at religion. I mean, this is where the organized part is like, it must be this way, and if it's not this way, it's like, yeah, I don't like that. That's counter to making good decisions.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
making
religion without tolerance. Religion without tolerance.
Yeah,
I think is the problem.
So that's terrible, right? But if you think about how do we progress, like, what is, like, you come up with a hypothesis, and until you've failed to disprove it, what is it? Well, it's a hypothesis. So what hypothesis do we have about the sun and the earth? Well, the earth is firm and the sun revolves around the earth. Okay, that's a hypothesis. Like, is it part of the religion? How did it come about? So you're building hypotheses, but then you should test them, and then once you've tested them, and so the point is that we cannot know everything, right? And so I think there's always room for whimsy, in a way, but that's not to say that we shouldn't try to test it. It's a bit like somebody said that that's basically a trope in the science fiction, is that any technology advanced enough looks like magic.
Yeah.
Well, I think there is a fuzzy boundary between religion and science anyway at the highest level. So
yeah.
So I don't think they're incompatible, is what I'm saying.
No, that's a good point. I'm actually quite fascinated. Whilst probably agnostic is currently my favourite term, I am fascinated to see what my two young daughters grow up and describe themselves as, because they both go to a C of E school, a Church of England school, but they are incredibly what's the word? They're very forthcoming with with celebrating all religions, because of course their school is made up from people from all sorts of different backgrounds. So I have two young daughters who are both obsessed and fascinated with Diwali as much as they are with the nativity play. So I don't know if that means this kind of fuzzy religion, what that makes them, but they're gonna grow up into these kind of religious mongrels where they have little bits of all sorts, and I think it's the best thing. I adore it.
Yeah, this is incredible. And speaking, like, our eldest just graduated from primary, and she's going, and we placed her into a Catholic school. And apart from the fact that it just offers really good educate, like outstanding education, we also thought, well, we're not going to teach her about religion, but it's part of it's part of life, part of culture. So we're going to expose her to that, and then let her make up her own mind, so much like you said about your daughters.
Yeah, it's nice. It's really nice. It's really refreshing, actually. Really refreshing. We should probably get back to our posers. So number 3 is any books that you can recommend to our listeners.
The Art of Strategy, A Game Theorist's Guide to Success in Business and Life by Avinash Dixit and Barry Nailbuff. That's it. That's the pitch. I mean, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. The second is, speaking of religion, is a little something that I picked up. Actually, I poached it from my mom. I don't know where she got it. It's a little Penguin Little Black Classics book. Costs £2. It has a pound sign in New Zealand, but whatever. I don't know. I think she paid New Zealand dollars. Whatever. It's very cheap. It's a 1,500-year-old book. Was written at around 540, and it's called The Rule of Benedict. It's basically the Rule of Saint Benedict. I find this book completely fascinating in looking at it from an organizational study point of view. He was talking about how to choose effectively mid-managers, and I mean, not everything there is awesome because it was written 540, but I think that's a fascinating book. It's not like I'm gonna say, like, you read this book and you know about everything there is to know. Like, probably don't punish people with beatings, because which is something he recommends.
Yeah, the disciplinary procedures were quite archaic. Yeah.
To be fair, he does recommend it as the last resort, and this is like in the modern corporate world, there are certain transgressions that you're being walked out, so maybe not with beatings, but there is a process even to get there, and it's like in the modern terms it would be disciplinary committee and performance management and whatever. It's just so fascinating that about 1,500 years ago, they just wrote lots of stuff that we keep reinventing. It's like, why are we not learning from the history? So that's a good one. It's it costs nothing, and I think it's just. And then the Expanse series of books. There was a TV show called The Expanse. So I've read all the books and currently reading the last one. It's a fascinating study of cultures and groups of people, and just basically has a lot of, I think, anthropological insights into developments of cultures and conflict between people, and it has some good and bad applications of game theory.
Cool. Well, I know that at least 2 of those books have never come up before, so that is wonderful, and that's rare. It's becoming increasingly rare for that to happen, so thank you. And then number 4 is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour depending on your view to our guest, who has to give their reasons why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
Yes. So I'm dedicating it to Alexei Domorev. I actually don't know how he pronounces his name, so I'm going to kind of anglicize it. He's been in Australia for like ages. He is also a written alum. He's done MBA in marketing at Melbourne Business School. And he runs a little agency, but it's an award-winning agency out of Queensland in Australia, called Green Lamp Marketing. And he and his wife also run a multi-award-winning Tealka tea company. It's an organic and multi-award-winning company. So Alexei helped me. He's a critical part of, first of all, he did my branding. And I should say that whatever you like from my branding, that's him. whatever you don't like, that's my bastardizing of it.
It's the client.
Yeah, it's the client. So he told me that I'm I don't know much about design, and I'm a danger of butchering stuff. But he gave me assets, and then I put them together. So the branding is the logo is his. Like he's really good. And he basically did. So this is a nice story. I think it's he did. I was hassling him to help me, and he was like, "Okay, we're gonna have one conversation. Then you're not gonna hear from me for about 5 weeks. Then I give you stuff, and whatever I give you, you're just gonna use. And if you like those conditions, I will help you. If you don't like them, just bugger off." And I like, done. Like, do it. Awesome. So there was no revision. There was no like first draft, whatever. There was no client feedback. He just came back with a brand book, said that's how you use it. These are the reasons. Just go and use it.
Have a nice day.
Yeah, have a nice day. And so this is brilliant. And I think he deserves he's a critical part of what we're doing, and it's just a cool guy too.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Well, I like that a lot. Well, this episode is very proudly dedicated to Alexei Demorov. And apologies, Alexei, if that isn't the correct pronunciation. But
we'll put the links to his stuff in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll link to that. We can link to that. We'll link to Green Lamp Marketing, and we'll dig out the tea company too. So that's perfect. Good to give that a nod. So as a final call to action, everyone can head over to this episode's listing to find all of those links. How else can they get more Andrey Ivanov and more business games?
So I like Twitter, and I mean that's how we know each other, and that's how I know JP and Rory, and it's how I got to know Mark Ritson to start with. So Twitter at Business Games AI, and that's my handle. On LinkedIn, I'm also findable. I'm using more LinkedIn. I like it less, but I use it more now since the launch of Business Games. So I've got two things. I have a favor to ask of the listeners, is if they go to www.business-games.ai/survey. And fill out a 4-minute survey. That would be of huge help.
Well, we'll include that link so it's easy for them to do. So Andrey, thank you so much for joining us. I've really enjoyed our chat. It's been great.
Giles, thank you so much for having me.
And finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the pod. Keep questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah.